The echo of Poppins. Can a single glance change the course of a life? The question hung in the frigid air as golden eyes met steel blue, suspended in a moment that seemed to stretch beyond the confines of time. In that heartbeat between breaths, something ancient and wordless passed between man and beast recognition that would alter the foundations of two seemingly separate worlds. It was in this silent exchange that destiny changed its course. The morning air carried the distinct scent of impending snow through Manhattan's concrete maze. Steam billowed from subway grates, carrying with it the earthy aroma of the underground world that pulsed beneath the city. In a forgotten alley off 47th Street, where shadows stretched long even at midday, a golden minus-haired dog pressed himself against a brick wall, seeking shelter from the biting December wind. Rusty hadn't eaten in 3 days. His once lustrous coat now hung in matted clumps around his emaciated frame, each rib visible beneath his dulled fur. The putrid smell of rotting food from nearby dumpsters tormented his sensitive nose. A garbage truck rumbled past the alley entrance, its hydraulic brakes squealing in protest. Rusty's ears twitched at the sound, but he didn't move. Experience had taught him that conservation of energy was crucial to survival. Instead, he watched the world through amber eyes that seemed too large for his gaunt face eyes, that held an intelligence and depth that spoke of a life before the streets. 3 months ago, he'd had a name that wasn't Rusty, though he'd never know that's what we'd call him, a warm bed, and the gentle hands of an elderly woman who smelled of lavender and mint tea. Then came the ambulance sirens, the strange men carrying her away, and the nephew who cleared out the apartment and abandoned Rusty on the street corner 20 blocks away. Since then, the city had been his unwilling teacher in the harsh lessons of survival. The distinct sound of expensive leather shoes striking pavement echoed through the alley. Rusty's ears perked up, his body tensing instinctively. Human footsteps meant either danger or opportunity, sometimes both. He remained perfectly still, his golden eyes tracking the approaching figure. Alexander Thornwood strode purposefully down the narrow passage, using it as a shortcut to his next meeting. His cashmere overcoat and tailored suit provided little protection against the emotional chill that had settled in his bones decades ago. At 40-7, Alexander Alex to no one, not anymore, had built Thornwood Enterprises into a financial juggernaut, his name synonymous with ruthless efficiency and clinical precision. His wealth was measured in billions, his success in the number of competitors he'd crushed beneath his polished Oxford shoes. The alley was a calculated risk. It would save him precisely from minutes and 30-7 seconds time he could use to review acquisition numbers before his meeting. What he hadn't calculated was the encounter that waited in the shadows. He spotted Rusty as he rounded a corner, his pace faltering momentarily before resuming with even more determination. The dog was clearly a stray, filthy, malnourished, taking up space that wasn't his. Alexander's upper lip curled slightly in disgust. "Move," he commanded, his voice as cold as the wind that whipped through the alley. Rusty didn't flinch. Instead, he lifted his head, meeting Alexander's gaze directly. Something in those amber eyes caught Alexander off guard, a dignified sorrow, an unspoken challenge that momentarily penetrated the carefully constructed armor he'd spent a lifetime building. For a fraction of a second, Alexander felt something shift inside him, a distant memory trying to surface. He shoved it back down with practiced efficiency. "Worthless mutt," he muttered, deliberately stepping around the dog. As he did, he kicked an empty coffee cup in Rusty's direction. The paper container clattered against the brick wall, but Rusty remained motionless, only his eyes following Alexander's movement. Then, as Alexander reached the end of the alley, it happened. A single, resonant bark echoed off the walls, stopping him mid-stride. It wasn't aggressive or frightened, it was almost like a statement, a declaration of existence. "I am here." I met her. Alexander turned, finding those golden eyes still fixed on him. For a heartbeat, discomfort crawled along his spine, not fear, but something more unsettling. Recognition. As if the dog had somehow seen through the expensive suit and imposing presence to something beneath, something Alexander himself had forgotten existed. With a sharp exhale, he adjusted his tie and continued on his way, the sound of his footsteps fading into the urban cacophony. Behind him, Rusty lowered his head once more, conserving energy, watching, waiting. Neither knew that their brief encounter had set something irreversible in motion. The Thornwood Tower dominated the Manhattan skyline, its glass exterior reflecting clouds that promised snow by evening. On the 50-3rd floor, Alexander strode through the executive suite, his face a masterpiece of controlled indifference. "You're late," Melanie observed as she fell into step beside him, tablet in hand. As his executive assistant for 8 years, she was one of the few people who could speak to him without carefully weighing each word first. "Traffic," he lied effortlessly. He wouldn't mention the alley or the dog. Such trivialities had no place in the realm of merger negotiations on hostile takeovers. "The Morrison team is waiting in the main conference room. Their final offer came in 10 minutes ago, 15% lower than our minimum acceptable figure." She handed him the tablet, her efficiency as precise as his own. Alexander scanned the numbers, his mind already calculating counter-minus moves and pressure points. This was where he excelled in the bloodless battle of business, where emotions were liabilities and hesitation meant defeat. And yet, as he pushed open the conference room door, an unexpected image flashed in his mind, golden eyes, steady and unflinching. He blinked it away and stepped into the arena. Hours later, as dusk settled over the city and the first snowflakes began their descent, Alexander sat alone in his office. The Morrison deal was secured on his terms, naturally. Their negotiator had left with slumped shoulders and a defeated expression that normally would have given Alexander a flicker of satisfaction. Tonight, however, that familiar spark was absent. He swirled the amber liquid in his crystal tumbler, watching as it caught the light from the city below. The snow was falling more heavily now, transforming Manhattan's chaos into something almost serene from this height. His thoughts, strangely restless, kept returning to the alley and the golden dog. Why had such an insignificant encounter lingered in his mind? Alexander prided himself on his focus, on his ability to discard anything that didn't serve his purpose. And yet, he set down his glass with unnecessary force and reached for his coat. It was time to go home, not that the vast penthouse apartment with its perfect furnishings and empty rooms really felt like home. It was simply where he slept occasionally. The limousine waited at the curb, Harold opening the door with practiced timing as Alexander emerged from the building. The snow crunched beneath his shoes as he slid into the leather interior, the warmth a stark contrast to the winter night. "Home, sir?" Harold asked, his voice filtering through the partition. Alexander opened his mouth to confirm, then hesitated. "No," he heard himself say. "Take me to 47th and Lexington." If Harold found the request unusual, he didn't show it. The car pulled smoothly into traffic, wipers working steadily against the thickening snowfall. Alexander stared out the window, watching as Manhattan transformed into a winter to blow, questioning his own actions but unable to stop himself. 20 minutes later, the limousine stopped at the corner he'd specified. "Wait here," he instructed Harold, stepping out into the snow. Flakes immediately clung to his dark coat and hair as he made his way toward the alley entrance. The narrow passage looked different in the gathering darkness, the accumulating snow softening its harsh edges. Alexander moved cautiously, suddenly aware of how out of place he was in this forgotten corner of the city he dominated from above. He found Rusty in the same spot, a dusting of snow covering his thin frame. For a moment, Alexander thought the dog might be dead, but then he saw the slight rise and fall of the animal's side, each breath a small, desperate triumph against the odds. As if sensing his presence, Rusty's eyes opened, that unnerving gaze finding Alexander through the falling snow. There was no fear in those eyes, no pleading, only a quiet dignity that struck something long dormant in Alexander's chest. "You're still here," he said, his voice sounding strange to his own ears. Rusty's tail moved slightly, a ghost of a wag that seemed to take tremendous effort. Alexander stood frozen, snow gathering on his shoulders, at war with himself. This was madness. He had meetings tomorrow, decisions affecting thousands of employees and millions in assets. He had no time for strays, human or animal. A violent shiver ran through Rusty's body, and something inside Alexander broke. With careful movements, he removed his cashmere scarf and approached the dog. Rusty watched him, neither retreating nor advancing. When Alexander crouched down, expensive suit pants pressing into the snow-covered ground, Rusty lifted his head slightly. "I don't know what I'm doing," Alexander muttered as he gently draped the scarf around the dog's thin body. The fabric, which had cost more than what many people earned in a day, seemed absurdly inadequate against the bitter cold. The sound of approaching voices caused Alexander to straighten quickly. A group of young men turned into the alley, their laughter sharp against the hushed snowfall. They slowed at the sight of Alexander, taking in his obvious wealth with predatory interest. "Well, look what we found," one of them said, a thin man with a scar across his cheek. "Little far from Wall Street, aren't you?" Alexander assessed the situation with the same cool calculation he applied to business threats. 4 men, possibly armed, versus one executive whose combat experience was limited to corporate boardrooms. The odds weren't favorable. "I was just leaving," he said evenly, already plotting the most efficient path back to the street. "Not with that watch, you're not," the leader replied, stepping closer. "That looks like a Patek Philippe." "Am I right?" "Must be worth, what, 100 grand." The men spread out, blocking Alexander's exit route. He felt his pulse quicken but kept his expression neutral. "Take it and go," he said, already working at the class. A watch was replaceable. Time, however, was a commodity he couldn't afford to lose permanently. A low growl stopped everyone in their tracks. Alexander glanced down to see Rusty struggling to his feet, the scarf sliding from his emaciated body. Despite his weakness, the dog placed himself between Alexander and the approaching men, his hackles raised and teeth bared. The would-be muggers hesitated, exchanging uncertain glances. "That mutt looks half-dead," the leader scoffed, but his confidence had visibly wavered. Rusty growled again, the sound vibrating with a ferocity that belied his physical state. His golden eyes, now flashing with protective fury, locked onto the leader's face. Alexander, seeing his opening, reached slowly into his pocket. "My wallet has 5,000 in cash," he said calmly. "It's yours if you leave now." The leader's eyes narrowed, calculating risk versus reward. After a tense moment, he nodded. "Toss it over." Alexander did, watching as the man quickly verified the contents before signaling to his companions. They backed away, disappearing around the corner with a final warning glance. When they were gone, Rusty's legs gave out, and he collapsed back onto the cold ground, his brief surge of strength exhausted. His breathing came in labored pants, each exhale creating small clouds in the frigid air. Alexander stood motionless, processing what had just happened. This half-minded starved creature had placed itself in harm's way for him, a stranger who had shown nothing but contempt hours earlier. The realization struck him with unexpected force, cracking something in the careful constructs of his worldview. Without further hesitation, he knelt and gently gathered Rusty into his arms. The dog was alarmingly light, his body radiating heat that spoke of fever rather than health. Rusty didn't struggle, either to weak or somehow understanding Alexander's intent. "I've got you," Alexander murmured, surprised by the gentleness in his own voice, as he carried Rusty toward the waiting limousine. Harold's eyes widened momentarily as Alexander approached with the filthy dog in his arms, but he quickly schooled his expression and opened the car door. "Find the nearest emergency veterinary clinic," Alexander instructed as he settled into the back seat, Rusty cradled against his chest. "Now." As the limousine pulled away from the curb, Alexander looked down at the dog, whose unexpected appearance had disrupted the careful order of his life. Rusty's eyes were closed now, his breathing shallow but steady. Snow melted on his matted fur, revealing patches of golden color beneath the grime. For the first time in years, Alexander Thornwood acted without calculating the return on investment, without considering strategic advantages or potential liabilities. The foreign sensation of it traveled through him like a current, uncomfortable yet somehow essential. In the quiet of the car, with Manhattan's snow-covered streets passing outside the windows, he made a silent promise to the creature in his arms, though whether it was for Rusty's benefit or his own, he couldn't yet say. The veterinary clinic was a stark contrast to the luxury Alexander typically surrounded himself with. Bright fluorescent lights, linoleum floors, and the mingled sense of antiseptic and animal created an environment utterly removed from his world of mahogany boardrooms and crystal decanters. Dr. Rive. Rivera worked efficiently, her hands gentle but firm as she examined Rusty. "Severe malnutrition and dehydration," she explained, meeting Alexander's eyes directly. "He also has an infection from an untreated wound on his paw, and his temperature is dangerously low." "Will he survive?" Alexander asked, surprised by how much the answer mattered. "With proper care, yes. He's young, probably around 2 years old, and despite everything, he's fighting." She glanced at Alexander's expensive suit, now stained with dirt and melted snow. "Are you planning to keep him?" The question caught him off guard. He began, then stopped. Was he? The practical answer was clear: of course not. His lifestyle, his penthouse with its pristine furnishings, his 60-hour work weeks, none of it was compatible with a pet, especially one requiring intensive care. And yet, he couldn't bring himself to say no. "For now," he said finally. "What does he need?" The next hour passed in a blur of information, medication schedules, feeding guidelines, follow-up appointments. Alexander absorbed it all with the same intensity he applied to market analyses and quarterly reports. When the time came to leave, Rusty had been cleaned, treated, and wrapped in proper blankets. He was still weak but alert, his golden eyes following Alexander's movements as if ensuring he wouldn't disappear. The ride to Alexander's penthouse was silent, Rusty dozing beside him under a heated blanket the clinic had provided. Occasionally, the dog would open his eyes, seeking confirmation that Alexander was still there, before drifting back to sleep. The doorman's carefully neutral expression as Alexander carried Rusty through the lobby of his exclusive building spoke volumes, but no one dared comment. Within the private elevator, ascending to the penthouse level, Alexander found himself wondering what he was doing. This spontaneous act of what? Compassion? Madness? Was entirely out of character. His penthouse, with its sweeping views of the city and minimalist design, felt strangely hollow as he entered. The space had been featured in architectural magazines, praised for its perfect balance of luxury and restraint. Now, with Rusty in his arms, Alexander saw it differently: cold, sterile, unlived in. He gently placed Rusty on a soft rug near the gas fireplace, which he activated with a remote control. The dog sighed as warmth began to spread through the room, his eyes heavy but still tracking Alexander's movements. "This is temporary," Alexander told him, unsure if he was trying to convince Rusty or himself. "Just until you're stronger." Rusty's tail moved slightly, a barely perceptible wag that nonetheless communicated understanding. Alexander found himself sitting on the floor beside the dog, his back against the Italian leather sofa he rarely used. Outside, snow continued to fall, transforming the city into a wonderland visible through floor minus to minus ceiling windows. "I had a dog once," Alexander said into the quiet room, surprising himself. His name was Scout. "I was 10 when he died." The memory, long buried under years of deliberate forgetting, surfaced with unexpected clarity. "He used to wait for me at the bus stop every day. Never missed once, not even in weather like this." Rusty shifted slightly, his head coming to rest against Alexander's leg. The simple contact sent an unfamiliar warmth through him, different from the heat of the fire. That night, Alexander slept on the sofa rather than in his bedroom, unwilling to leave Rusty alone. For the first time in years, his dreams were not of markets and mergers, but of simpler times of a boy running through autumn leaves with a dog bounding joyfully at his side. Morning arrived with sunlight streaming through the windows, reflecting off the fresh, snow-covering Manhattan. Alexander woke with a start, momentarily disoriented to find himself on the sofa rather than in his bed. The events of the previous day rushed back as his gaze fell on Rusty, who was awake and watching him with those penetrating eyes. "Good morning," Alexander said, feeling oddly self-conscious. Rusty's tail thumped weakly against the rug in response. A glance at his watch, his backup, not the Patek Philippe, showed it was already past 7. He never slept this late, never started his day without precisely 40-5 minutes of preparation. His morning routine was sacrosanct, a cornerstone of the discipline that had built his empire. Today, however, that routine would have to wait. Following drive. Rivera's instructions, he prepared Rusty's medication and a small portion of the special food she had provided. To his surprise, Rusty ate cautiously but completely, his movements becoming slightly more energetic as the food and medicine took effect. Alexander showered and dressed for work, his mind already shifting to the day ahead: meetings, calls, decisions waiting to be made. Yet as he stood in the doorway, briefcase in hand, he found himself hesitating. The thought of leaving Rusty alone brought an unexpected wave of concern. His phone vibrated with a message from Melanie. Board meeting in 30. Morrison contracts ready for final review. Reality reasserted itself. He was Alexander Thornwood, CEO of a multi-billion-dollar company. He had responsibilities, obligations that couldn't be postponed for a stray dog. With a final glance at Rusty, who had settled back into his blanket, Alexander left for the day. But Rusty remained present in his thoughts, an undercurrent beneath the surface of meetings and negotiations. By mid-afternoon, Alexander found himself doing something unprecedented. He left the office early, delegating the remaining work to his executive team. "Is everything all right?" Melanie asked, unable to hide her surprise. "Fine," he replied curtly. "I'll be working from home." The journey back to his penthouse felt unusually long. Alexander caught himself checking his watch repeatedly, an unfamiliar anxiety building with each passing minute. When he finally arrived home, the relief he felt upon seeing Rusty still there, slightly stronger than in the morning, was disproportionate to the situation. The dog greeted him with more energy, his tail wagging with genuine enthusiasm. Alexander found himself smiling in response, the expression so foreign to his face that it almost felt like a muscle strain. Days passed, falling into a new routine. Rusty grew stronger under Alexander's careful attention, his golden coat regaining some of its luster, his frame gradually filling out. The apartment began to change. Dog beds appeared in several rooms, toys scattered across once immaculate floors, and a section of the refrigerator was dedicated to specialized dog food. Alexander's work habits shifted subtly. He started coming home at reasonable hours, sometimes even working from the penthouse to keep Rusty company. His executive team noticed the change but knew better than to comment directly. Only Melanie dared to observe, "You seem different lately." More. Present. Alexander dismissed the observation with a non-committal sound, but privately, he knew she was right. Something was changing within him, a slow thaw after decades of winter. One evening, as Alexander sat on the sofa reviewing contracts, Rusty brought him a ball, one of many toys that had mysteriously appeared in the penthouse. The dog placed it gently on Alexander's lap, then backed up a few steps, his expectant gaze unmistakable. Alexander stared at the ball, then at Rusty. "I'm working," he said, gesturing to the documents spread across the coffee table. Rusty tilted his head, his expression somehow both understanding and unchallenging. After a moment, he sat, still watching Alexander with patient expectation. With a sigh that contained more amusement than exasperation, Alexander set aside his tablet and picked up the ball. 5 minutes, he told Rusty firmly. 5 minutes became 30, the contracts forgotten as Alexander found himself on the floor, playing fetch with a dog who just weeks ago had been fighting for survival in an alley. The sound of his own laughter, genuinely mirthful for the first time in years, startled him, so much that he paused mid-throw. Rusty, misinterpreting the hesitation, trotted over and nudged Alexander's hand with his nose, prompting him to continue the game. As Alexander looked into those golden eyes, now bright with health and happiness, he realized with sudden clarity Rusty wasn't just staying until he recovered. He was home. The admission shifted something fundamental in Alexander's worldview. If he could be wrong about this, if the careful, controlled existence he had built could be improved rather than compromised by the chaotic addition of a rescued dog, what else might he be wrong about? Spring arrived in New York, melting away the last traces of winter. In a sunlit corner of Central Park, Alexander sat on a bench, watching as Rusty explored a patch of fresh grass. The dog moved with confident energy now, his golden coat gleaming in the sunshine, his body strong and healthy. "He looks good," a voice observed. Alexander turned to find Daniel Westfield settling onto the bench beside him. Daniel's reputation as both a successful businessman and a dedicated animal welfare advocate made him a unique figure in New York's elite circles. They had crossed paths occasionally over the years, more competitors than colleagues. "He is," Alexander replied, his usual guardedness softened by genuine pride in Rusty's recovery. "Never thought I'd see Alexander Thornwood as a dog person," Daniel remarked, his tone light but his gaze assessing. "Heard you've been making some changes lately." Alexander raised an eyebrow. The business world ran on gossip as much as money, but he was surprised his personal evolution had generated notice. "Nothing dramatic," he deflected. Daniel smiled knowingly. Walking out of the Henderson negotiation when they mentioned cutting the employee health plan seemed pretty dramatic to some. That. Alexander had indeed abandoned what would have been a lucrative deal when he discovered the human cost it would entail. The old Alexander would have seen it as collateral damage, necessary sacrifice for greater profit. The new Alexander, the one shaped by golden eyes and unconditional loyalty, found he couldn't separate numbers from the lives they represented anymore. "It was a poor investment long minus term," he said simply. Daniel nodded, not pushing further. "I'm expanding my foundation's rescue center," he said instead. "We're opening a new facility next month, focusing on rehabilitation and training for service dogs. Could use someone with your financial expertise on the advisory board." Alexander's immediate instinct was to refuse. Charity work was time-consuming and offered no tangible return. But as he watched Rusty bounding joyfully through the grass, he reconsidered. What would constitute a return now? His definitions were changing, expanding beyond the balance sheets and profit margins. "Send me the details," he heard himself say. "I'll look it over." Daniel looked genuinely surprised, then pleased. "Will do." He stood, offering his hand. "For what it's worth, Thornwood, I think Rusty's been good for you." As Daniel walked away, Alexander reflected on the truth of that statement. In saving Rusty, something of himself had been rescued as well, parts he had thought long dead, buried under years of single-minded ambition and emotional detachment. Rusty returned to the bench, dropping a stick at Alexander's feet and looking up with expectant joy. Without hesitation, Alexander picked it up and threw it, watching as Rusty darted away in gleeful pursuit. Yes, he thought. Rusty had indeed been good for him. Now, perhaps it was time to extend the good beyond the borders of his own life. The summer humidity hung heavily over New York as Alexander stood at the podium, cameras flashing before him. Behind him, the newly constructed Thornwood Animal Rehabilitation Center gleamed in the July sunshine, its modern architecture designed to maximize natural light and open space for its residents. Today marks not just the opening of a new facility, Alexander said into the microphones, but a new direction for Thornwood Enterprises. Our commitment to ethical business practices and community investment begins here, but will extend to all aspects of our operations. At his feet, Rusty sat attentively, a custom band bearing the center's logo around his neck. The dog's journey from starving stray to the unofficial mascot of Alexander's new philanthropic venture had become something of a local legend, featured in business publications and animal welfare magazines alike. The changes in Alexander's approach to business had sent ripples through the corporate world. Some dismissed it as a mid-life crisis or a publicity stunt. Others, particularly the employees who benefited from improved conditions and the communities receiving investment, welcomed the transformation. Alexander himself was still adapting to his evolving identity. The ruthless CEO hadn't disappeared entirely. He still drove hard bargains and expected excellence. But compassion had tempered his methods, and purpose had replaced pure profit as his primary motivation. After the ceremony, as Alexander walked through the center's main building with Rusty trotting beside him, Daniel approached with a smile. "Quite a turnaround in a year," he observed. "From corporate shark to philanthropist." Alexander glanced down at Rusty, who looked up at him with unwavering trust. "I had a good teacher," he replied. Later that evening, alone in his penthouse now considerably less sterile, with dog toys scattered about and photographs adorning once bare walls, Alexander sat on the floor beside Rusty. The dog rested his head on Alexander's lap, content in the quiet companionship they shared. "You know," Alexander said softly, scratching behind Rusty's ears, "most people would say I saved you that night." He smiled, a genuine expression that had become increasingly common on his once severe face. "But we both know the truth, don't we?" Outside, Manhattan continued its endless rhythm, a city of millions each caught in their own stories of loss and discovery, hardship and redemption. Within the penthouse walls, a man and a dog who had found each other at their lowest moments rested in the knowledge that sometimes salvation comes in the most unexpected form. Sometimes it comes with golden eyes and a wagging tail, asking nothing but offering everything in return. The echoes that remain. The transformation of Alexander Thornwood from ruthless corporate titan to compassionate business leader became a case study discussed in MBA programs across the country. Articles analyzed the financial impact of his ethical pivot. Consultants debated whether his model could be replicated, and competitors watched warily as Thornwood Enterprises flourished under its new philosophy. What these analyses missed, however, was the profound personal journey beneath the public narrative. They couldn't measure the weight lifted from Alexander's shoulders as he reconnected with his humanity, or quantify the joy that now colored his days. No spreadsheet could capture the healing power of Rusty's unconditional acceptance, which had cracked open a heart calcified by decades of isolation. The lessons of Alexander and Rusty's story extend far beyond one man's redemption or one dog's rescue. They speak to universal truths about connection, purpose, and the unexpected ways we find meaning in our lives. First is the power of genuine seeing. In that initial encounter, Rusty truly saw Alexander not his wealth, status, or carefully constructed facade, but his essential humanity, including the wounds he carried and the potential for compassion buried beneath years of emotional armor. The dog's unwavering gaze penetrated defenses that human interaction had never breached. There is profound healing in being truly seen, in having someone recognize our authentic self beneath the roles we play and the masks we wear. Second is the transformative nature of caring for something beyond ourselves. In taking responsibility for Rusty's well-being, Alexander rediscovered parts of himself long suppressed: gentleness, patience, playfulness, empathy. The daily acts of feeding, walking, and nurturing another living being gradually rewired neural pathways hardened by years of self-interest. Responsibility became not a burden but a bridge back to his better nature. Third is the ripple effect of compassion. What began as one act of kindness toward a single stray dog expanded outward in ever-widening circles, from Alexander's personal redemption to improved conditions for his employees. From corporate policy changes to community investments, from the rehabilitation sector to the countless animals and people who would benefit from its services for years to come. No act of genuine compassion, however small it may seem, ever ends with itself. Perhaps most importantly, Alexander and Rusty's journey reminds us that it's never too late to change course. After decades of pursuing wealth and power at the expense of connection, Alexander found that his life could still take a radical new direction. The path of transformation wasn't always smooth. Old habits resisted change. Business associates questioned his judgment, and he himself sometimes doubted the wisdom of his new approach. Yet with each step forward, the new way became more natural, more aligned with his rediscovered authentic self. For those struggling with loneliness in our hyper-connected yet emotionally distant world, Rusty and Alexander's bond offers a powerful reminder that meaningful connection often comes from unexpected sources. Sometimes the heart that understands us best doesn't speak our language but communicates through loyalty, presence, and unwavering acceptance. For those caught in cycles of materialism and status-seeking, their story challenges the definition of success. Alexander had achieved every conventional marker of accomplishment: wealth, power, recognition, yet found himself profoundly empty until a golden haired stray showed him a different measure of value. True wealth, he discovered, lay not in what he possessed, but in what possessed his heart. And for those who have experienced abandonment or hardship, like Rusty, the narrative offers hope that past suffering doesn't determine future possibilities. Just as Rusty's resilience carried him through months on the streets to eventually find home and purpose, our own capacity to endure and remain open to connection can lead us to unexpected redemption. In a world increasingly defined by division and self-interest, the simple truth at the core of this story shines like a beacon: we heal by helping. We find ourselves by losing ourselves in service to others, and no one, human or animal, is beyond the reach of compassion's transformative power. The echo of paw prints on our hearts often leaves the deepest and most lasting impression, reminding us of what it means to love unconditionally and be loved the same way in return. Thank you for joining us on this journey of transformation and connection. The bond between humans and dogs has a unique power to heal, teach, and remind us of our capacity for unconditional love. Have you experienced a special connection with a dog that changed your life? Perhaps a rescue pet who ended up rescuing you, or a loyal companion who stayed by your side through difficult times. We'd love to hear your stories in the comments below. And if this story touched your heart, please subscribe to our channel for more tales that celebrate the extraordinary bonds between humans and animals. Together we can create a community that recognizes and honors the profound gifts our fur-legged friends bring to our lives. Remember, sometimes the souls who save us don't wear shoes, they wear paws.